cloud. Charlie loves it when I record to the cloud. All right, welcome everybody. I would like to officially welcome you to our new weekly Lunch and Learn series. Like I said in the email, I'm looking forward to the day when we can get back to being face-to-face and doing these things in person, although we are more spread out now than we used to be, and so we will always be running these online. We will record them as they happen. We will have them someplace that everyone can get to them. And right now I'm going to mute everyone. Or make sure, please mute yourselves if you have not. Okay, so in today's meeting, we're going to focus on solution maps. A solution map is a process that we use to initiate, I want to say every single project that SolutionStream manages. It's probably only about 90% of the projects, but it is our best practice for how to kick a project off with a client for ultimate success. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the next 25 or 30 minutes, if I can do a good job of time boxing myself, just running through what it is, how we use it, and the output from it. And then I'm going to encourage questions if you have them. And then if not, we can just hang out and chat for a few minutes, because I don't know about you guys, but I get lonely sitting in my dumb kitchen all day, every day. My dog's nice, but he doesn't talk to me yet. So without much further ado, I'm going to jump in to telling you about what a solution map is. Assuming I can get to the controls. Are you seeing my screen that says a solution map, a playbook for building what matters? Okay, so a solution map is a 4-day immersive workshop where we bring key stakeholders from a client's organization and we lock them in a room, either virtually or physically, with between 3 and 4 of our team, who are ideally going to be the project team going forward. And our representatives include a senior level developer or architect level developer, a UX designer, and a product manager. And from the client organization, we recommend that they bring in, well, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. And so its purpose is to define a product. And we built this based off, well, a lot of inspiration from Google's design sprints. If you've read the book Sprint, I think it actually came out about 1.5 years after we had been actively running these for clients. But certainly that movement within Google and within the Google Ventures arm was several years old at that point. I became kind of enamored with it. And we wanted to test out something that would really help us as consultants get a better understanding of what we were actually trying to build. You know, it was kind of the classic story before that, where clients would bring to us a list of, you know, bullet features. Here's the features they want, and they're just bullets on a page. And they say things like, you know, integrate with, you know, our CRM. Well, we all know, like, software is complex and decisions drive success, and the scarcest commodity on any project is an actual understanding of the requirements. And so we really felt like trying to work with clients and estimate projects and initiate projects off of the strength of a bunch of bullets on a list wasn't benefiting us as an organization, and it wasn't benefiting the client. And so we started taking those ideas that were coming out of Google Ventures, and we started playing around with how we could use a sprint style immersive workshop to really, over the course of a week, understand those requirements, force the client to make decisions about what matters and what they actually need in the MVP, uncover the big questions, uncover the risks, and then use the wireframes to lock down the decisions in a low fidelity UI so that later they ideally can't say, well, you guys promised us X, Y, Z. And, you know, hopefully we have a healthier conversations with our clients than that anyway. But so the sprint is primarily made up of 4 phases: understanding, defining, wireframing, and and then deciding. And we do use a lot of agile processes. We use design thinking processes. And somebody is loud and should need, I think it's Jamie. And then, you know, absolutely our goal is to uncover and discover their business challenges and then to collaborate on the solutions. This deck that I'm showing you guys, we have these pretty fancy printed out versions. And part of what I think has happened as over the last, it's been about 3.5 years we've been actively running these, maybe 4, time flies. These kinds of assets that we bring or we provide to the client have become really refined. And it's actually interesting to watch clients when they come in, because there's kind of this feel when they get this fancy book that walks them through this process, and we're all super established. We know how to do it, and everybody kind of comes super prepared. You can see this, like, they kind of sit up a little bit. They feel like they're participating in something that will actually help them be more successful and has that established feel about it. And we feel the same way too. You know, it's a great experience to walk into a workshop like this for our teams, even when we're bringing people in new, and we train people regularly on how to do these so that we can continually expand the people who have this skill set. You know, knowing that you've got this framework that's established, that we've done hundreds of times, makes it a lot easier to kind of go through this process. And so we commit to 3 primary artifacts as a outcome of the solution map. Stories on board, and I'll show you stories on board in a minute. I'm not going to talk about it really deeply. Wireframes, and then a summary document. Now I'll show you each one of those, but I'm going to skip past that for now. But, you know, honestly, the actual value to our customer, those things are valuable without a doubt. Stories on board is set up so we can pull those stories once we get them created directly into Jira. We can hit the ground running with the wireframes. The summary doc summarizes everything that we've done. But ultimately, for most of our customers, the value is the clarity they get of understanding their own requirements better. You know, everybody thinks they know what they're building until somebody starts challenging assumptions and saying, well, what happens then? And what happens in this error state? And they're like, oh, wow, nobody ever showed me that there was all this risk or all of this uncovered understanding that I needed to go through. So we set rules and we use speed time boxing heavily. One of the things we tell people right at the beginning, both when we deliver this physically and when we deliver it digitally, we've delivered, I want to say 4 or 5 so far digitally since the beginning of the pandemic. Right now we're using a tool called Miro, where we've tried to replicate as much of that experience as possible digitally. We tell people right up front, get in the habit of sticky notes. We provide a ton. My office always kind of looks like a big vomit fest of sticky notes. When you have people in a room together trying to collaborate about something, it's really easy for people to start getting distracted or to start being passive. And we use the sticky notes both as a way to enforce, ideally, participation across both our team and their team, but also we recommend that as people are coming up with ideas or collaborating around things, jotting them down and getting them kind of out of their head and stuck someplace where they can be collaborated around helps people, you know, participate more and bring a lot of great ideas. We use speed time boxing, and again, this is pulled pretty directly from Google's design sprints. We use the time boxes. All of the activities that we do are time boxed. And first it stays focused, and this is probably like for those of us who run these regularly, for me, this is probably the thing I need to work on the most. I am not always, I'm great at time boxing the activities, but not always great at time boxing the discussions. I believe in time boxing as a tool to help teams collaborate more effectively and more, I think you get better outcomes, partially because when people are feeling pressured, I think your brain just starts firing a little bit better. And then also it just makes sure that people don't get too distracted with their pedantic desires. And this is a great one for me. You know, I can sit and talk about nothing for like 35 minutes. The time boxing enforces the client stay focused on our outcomes. You know, that there's not sometimes a need for as much conversation as we think there is. We demand clear roles, and I want to point out actually the most important role and why I think this is generally such an effective process for our clients. We require them to bring somebody who has decision power, and not just decision power for the workshop itself, but somebody who has enough authority within the organization that a month later, when Bob from accounting shows up and says, why the heck did we do this? This doesn't make sense at all. The decider says, here's exactly why I did it. I would do it again. We want the thing we're trying to solve for here is that kind of classic siloed effect that happens in organizations where a group of people make a good decision and then that's undercut later by a bunch of second guessers. We want to make sure that the team has the authority from their parent organization to be actually the true sponsors of this project, because otherwise, for one thing, why would we do this anyway? And why would we as an organization be committing to scope and timeline if that person who was making those decisions in real time doesn't have that authority? Which isn't to say that we don't anticipate that scope will change after this workshop. It always will. We are at our core still a truly agile organization that believes in supporting changing requirements. This is more than anything a base point starting line that allows us to continually talk about cost, timeline, and scope in a way we've already with the client established and feel comfortable with. So I love pointing out that decider role because I do think it's so important both for us as an organization as we're going through this with the client to know that this is important to the organization and the person making the decision has that authority, but also I don't remember what the rest of my point was, so I'll move on. The experts we recommend they bring from their organization are, we want somebody ideally representing all the major arms of their company. And I didn't put specifically customer service, but it's one of the first ones that I call out. In our ideal, bring an actual customer if you have one, but bring somebody from marketing, bring someone from finance and from tech, from your UX department or your visual department. I recommend to clients, if I'm pitching this to them pre-sale, I recommend they bring the biggest naysayer in their organization, the person that's going to be second guessing them afterwards, so that person has to own that negative reaction to what we're going to build real time, and that we can have those fights at the point that we're having the fight rather than it be a political thing after the fact. These are some of the rules, and I am a tyrant about the rules. No surprise to anyone. A lot of these rules are kind of the same thing over and over again, which is get your butt out of the seat, virtually or physically, draw things, and participate, and yet still be kind to people. We have said for a long time that participating on the solution stream side, and the client side, I tell clients all the time, when you participate in this, it is one of the most brutal, exhausting work experiences you will ever have. It is raw. We've seen people brought to tears. It's rare in a work environment that you're asked to focus at a radical level for 4 days, where you're asked to understand something complex and dig like through the complexities just that intently, where you have to navigate disagreements and conflict actively, helpfully, and pushing towards a clear outcome. And so we definitely, it is brutal. Our basic rule of thumb is if somebody's participated in the solution map, they need a week off before they can participate again, because otherwise they're just too drained, and maybe not depressed, but drained. So I want to talk just really briefly about some of the activities that we do, the kinds of how those kind of manifest, and then show you some of the deliverables. So the first phase is understand. And we start by understanding their business goals, constraints and risks, and really their outcomes. It's actually, I think we've all been on projects where you don't actually know what the finish line is. You don't know what the goal is. You don't even, the organization's constantly changing their mind. Now let's look at this. Now let's look at this. Definitely, these are strategic conversations that ultimately should be driving feature decisions and prioritization decisions, because it's really easy for both us and clients to get distracted by shiny things that may not necessarily fit their goals, just because, and they may not always understand that without us advising them that way. And these kinds of conversations allow us to be in a very healthy consultative place with the client, where we're talking really openly about what they want to achieve. While we're doing all these lightning talks, our team, their team, furiously taking sticky notes, sticking them up on walls or sticking them up into Miro. We want to talk about cost and timeline. We want to be very open about how much cost and timeline drive scope and vice versa. We want to understand what their competitive landscape is. We do these workshops with a wide variety of clients. We've done these workshops with big companies with arms within a company. We've done these with startups who are one person who comes to a workshop, which generally isn't our ideal because it's a kind of an odd dynamic, but we've been very successful even running those. In both cases, it's really good to know who you're competing with. We also, and in this step, really want to understand how other people are solving an analogous problem, because we might be able to steal some ideas from them or learn from the ways that they're not. We define personas. These are pretty basic persona kind of, and super simple personas. Actually, Jeff and I kind of regularly are looking a little bit critically at this and saying, how can we do this part better? And how can we make sure these personas are useful? But it's one of the things we talk through. We do a technical overview. One of the upcoming how we do lunch and learns will be specifically focused on this right here. This, oops, you can't touch that way. The quality of service attributes. We as SolutionStream do have a separate offering that's a quality of service assessment, where we assess somebody's technology. During this part of the solution map, we're more focused on understanding what kind of capacity the client has, what challenges they might foresee on the technical side. But we also do want to understand what their prioritization is on non-functional attributes. We don't want to put all of our focus on security if what really matters to them is extensibility. It's also interesting during this phase how often the clients lie to themselves about what they think is important. Extensibility is a great example, because I think the last 3 solution maps, the client said, absolutely, we have to have extensibility. But there's a lot of cost with extensibility. And, when you start giving up features for clients versus the ability to easily extend your application, you might find it's not as big of a priority as you think it is. At the end of this understand phase, we create a sprint challenge. The sprint challenge statement is designed to be kind of our North Star for the remaining workshop. It's supposed to describe succinctly what we're building. And when we do these physically, I brought in some examples here. This is our first activity that the clients can start to see how we use both this collaborative process and then the sticky voting that we do. So we make everybody get a piece of paper, or we can do it virtually, and they're writing based on the previous 3 hours or 4 hours at this point of discovery. They're writing their own challenge statement for what they want to achieve with this application, tied back to these kind of rules that we've defined for what a good sprint challenge statement is. Once everybody does their own silent brainstorming for 2 minutes, we take turns describing what we wrote, and then we take turns voting. And if you can see here, this one doesn't have a ton. It's got some stickies. We have little teeny stickies, and everybody gets a certain amount of stickies, and you vote on either the total concept that you think really captured it, or individual points that you think really captured the ideas. And then as a team, us and the client, we talk through it and craft the actual ideal sprint challenge statement. And I think I have a printed Word version here that we will use as the North Star throughout the rest of the workshop. And we do refer back to them, and we'll say, hey guys, do you remember our primary goal here was to ensure profitability? Do these features actually get us closer to that? You know, and sometimes so easy for people to get excited about what they think are table stakes features that it's you need somebody constantly reminding you to what actually are we trying to achieve in this short term. So that's kind of our first understanding phase. Then we start to talk about user story maps. And let's see, I'm at 12:23. I'm going to try not to get very deep into user story maps. I have that planned for next week's How We Do, and really talking through user stories, how we use them, and the intricacies. I'm not going to do that very much right now, even though I do love user story maps. At this phase, and this 90% of the time ends up being where we start the second day. And that's where, you know, I mentioned we're always kind of trying to refine and tighten things up. And I'm not always great at time boxing. And I suspect the other people who regularly facilitate that first phase should probably take us closer to 4 hours and not the 6 that we typically see. So then we come in on this, we'll call it for the next day for now. We start by having them go through this exercise of writing out their morning activity. And this is always a fun thing to take people, because this is a non-technical exercise. They are literally for 10 minutes writing out how they spent their morning. And then we take turns walking through them. And it's interesting because as you see people describe their morning in a higher fidelity, their minds start to be open to how different features on an application can be pulled out without having, you know, major impact. We talk about, like, one morning you might skip a shower because you're in a hurry, and then you're going to put on deodorant, maybe more deodorant, to make up for the fact that you're going to stink a little bit, so that they can kind of start to visualize how we organize and slice user story maps to create a roadmap. During this process, I also actually walk them through what a user story map is. We pull open the application that we use to create user story maps, which is called Stories on Board. And we show them our example of a completed user story map. And I am going to quickly do that in case somebody doesn't have familiarity. Hold on one second. I have to actually escape. I said escape. Okay, thank you. We have a fake user story map that we use to describe user story maps. And this fake user story map is for a fictitious map shop. And this is great because everybody in the world at this point has a lot of familiarity for how a basic e-commerce platform works. And this describes a very basic e-commerce platform. And a user story map is really just a somewhat visual representation of user stories organized in such a way that makes it easy to visualize how an individual user story is going to contribute to an overarching product that's going to be developed. And that's my super short description of that. So we show them how the user story map works and how we use it to cost and prioritize features, both while we're in the course of the solution map, but then also ultimately throughout the project, how they'll be able to use that to visualize what their product's actually going to have in it by the time we're done. And then the next thing that we do, and we call them next, but these two things really happen kind of back and forth just in tandem. We start wireframing, and a lot of times we'll have built out some of the key interactions in sticky notes first before we start wireframing. But we start with a sketching exercise where they're going to sketch 4 different versions of a particular interaction. And again, we do this a lot like we do with that sprint challenge statement, where we're sketching different versions and then we take turns describing them. This is very rigorously time boxed. And then we're putting stickies on the different things, talking about them. And then we group sketch after that. We go through and we identify the key elements, and then leaning heavily both on our UX designer to guide the conversation and make recommendations, and in some cases pull decisions out of clients' hands. Like, we don't need to, in general, reinvent the wheel on a user's expectation of where they're going to go to find their profile. And so we leverage our UX designers' expertise, and then they help guide the whole team through a collective sketching wireframe exercise that we kind of are doing real time, typically on a whiteboard, drawing, and we use sticky notes to kind of represent data. And then once we get it to a place where we can all look at each other and say, is this pretty good? We say, hey, decider, do we agree? The decider says thumbs up. Then we go back to the user story map and say, have we captured all of these interactions that are represented here on this wireframe in these user stories? And where's our gap in the understanding? And I think that's what these two things also describe. And then the last thing is this prioritization, and what are they actually going to get, and what is the actual MVP? And this phase, let's see how I'm doing on time. All right, this phase typically, it happens somewhat our last day, but it also kind of has a follow-up the following. And I'm going to go back to the user story map and show you why. Well, the following week has some specific things that happen. One of the things that we do within the story map, you'll see here, this target 48 points. You know, part of the goal for the client is out of this workshop, and it's also why it's not a design sprint. They want to know how much how much scope am I going to get for my budget? Here's my $150,000. Here's my $200,000. What am I going to get? We translate the budget into a target point, and there's a fairly complicated way that number happens that I am not qualified to describe. But we come up with this target number that represents their budget, kind of spread across all the things we believe need to happen to make a project successful. And then part of our goal the week after the solution map on our team is to go into each of these stories, make sure that we have a decent understanding of what's in there. This is an especially detailed description. We typically don't actually get the wireframes in here. But you know, what is the acceptance criteria for it? What are we committing to in exchange for a number that is going to be something that they decide to prioritize or not based off of? And so that's part of the costing and prioritization conversation, is around showing to them what those costs are. And typically in the solution map, we do try and at least identify big, medium, small on the feature set, especially if their budget is small, which isn't atypical. And then so just so that we can get an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And then the following week after the workshop, we refine that user story map. The UX designer goes and makes some mid-fidelity wireframes that represent the low fidelity wireframes that we created collaboratively during the workshop. And then the last piece that we do is a summary of all of the discovery. This is our last major deliverable. And it describes all of the conversations wrapped up in a pretty nice, with a pretty nice bow. So here, this is, you know, again, our fake e-commerce map shop. And we just document all of those decisions and conversations so that they have those in a real confined space, as well as an easy link to the user story map that we created and the wireframes that we created. And then lastly, kind of the budget based on those conversations that we've had, and a timeline of our projected timeline for the project. And this is a pretty nice deliverable for the clients, because then they can typically, you know, if they're in a funding phase or in a big organization, they're going to be using this to communicate all of the things that we just got done determining. And it makes it, I think, a lot easier for them to understand and visualize the outputs from the solution map. And that is my 33 minutes of yammering on what a solution map is. So before I open it up for questions, I want to leverage the people who regularly do workshops, both from the technical side, product side, and UX side. What did I miss? What do you guys want to add to the conversation? Or is this going to be the moment that someone says, Cameo, you're muted?
Cameo, you've been muted this whole time.
This whole time.
So embarrassing for you.
I know, right? What do you want to add, Charlie?
I don't really have anything to add, partially because of other commitments. I was a solid 25 minutes late to your presentation.
Nice. Okay.
However, the part that I did catch, which seemed to be towards the end there, seemed to be pretty solid. You did mention some magic that went into
you're responsible for
to calculating. As I understand it, you were talking about the points for the points that they're looking for based off their budget. Was that what you were talking about?
Yeah, and that there for me is some mystery of exactly how we translate dollars into points.
Magic.
I that's what I had assumed. Yes.
Well, it's a bit of a lengthy process, and not lengthy. That's probably the wrong way to say it. But there end up being a handful of variables involved in it that are kind of hard to talk about. But we do have a spreadsheet that we put the development points into, and then that spreadsheet also helps us determine how much of the other stuff that needs to be done beyond development and beyond actual estimated points actually needs to be accounted for in there. For example, every project should have a certain amount of oversight and a certain amount of QA and a certain amount of project management and a certain amount of design. Sometimes those are estimated as cold hard facts based off of, you know, we'll have a designer if we feel like it's necessary actually go in and say, this is, you know, my points estimate for these screens, and we'll separate that out into its own point style estimate. But sometimes, like QA, standard QA on a typical project, or even our oversight type of stuff, it ends up being a percentage of the estimate. And so we use all of that to get kind of a total budget for the project. And then we spread that out into the estimated development points. So we have what is essentially a loaded development point that we provide to the customer so that they can use to prioritize what their plans are. And that is, and maybe more confusing than having just said it's magic, but I could certainly walk anyone who's interested through it or that hasn't done it through it as well. And we can.
And we could have that as a future topic too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other additions from, or should I just open it up to any questions anyone has? Josh, do you have any additions? You've probably done more than a workshop.
Josh is probably the solution map expert, I'd say.
I would say too.
So do you have a hard time?
Let's have questions.
Okay, let's have questions. What's your questions, Anthony?
Do you have a hard time with the time boxing? Because I noticed a lot of the times, especially in the beginning of those slides, were very short, like 2 minutes. And I would imagine that those are really hard to keep.
So we actually send, and I forgot to mention this, we send a survey with those same questions to the client prior to the workshop. And, you know, it's not actually, somewhat it's there that we run into the time boxing, and we tweak those pretty regularly, those amounts of times as we find that we need more. But it's also, at least those first few are not the places that we generally find that we need to expand the time.
Yeah, time boxing at the beginning is usually pretty easy. And if we need to go a few minutes over, we add a few minutes, we get a consensus from the room and we're like, hey, we're talking about some good stuff here. Should we go another 5 minutes? And we set the time again. And we just keep trying to go through that. But yeah, once you get into some of the later stuff is really where the time boxing starts to slip a little bit. Like we're going to have an activity where we're going to talk about some designs and we're going to do some, people are going to explain their stuff. And sometimes we get on some tangents that we let go and maybe we shouldn't, and we should be a little more focused. But at the same time, like Cameo said, it is intense. It is hard to stay that focused that long. And so one thing that's really imperative is frequent breaks. Like you got to be really, really good about saying, okay, it's been an hour, we're taking a break. Doesn't matter if we're in the middle of something that's awesome, let's come back to it, or let's finish up 5 minutes here, but we need to take a break for our brains and go walk and get some drinks and things like that.
And I would also add that it's very important that the facilitators cognizant and diligent about keeping those time boxes, especially early in the solution map, so you can start to establish a culture of keeping those time boxes, and that gets the right ideas out at the very front of the conversation, and not like, often clients will be like, well, let me give you some history on that. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's just an opportunity for them to talk. And so you've got to kind of balance that. And a good facilitator recognizes that and shuts that sort of activity down and keeps us within those time boxes.
So one other thing that I may add in, unfortunately, I was kind of in Charlie's boat where I joined very late to it, but a lot of the time slipping happens usually further in the project when you're trying to resolve the problems, right?
Yeah.
You have to ask the questions of the client, and they have to go research and find out what the business solution is to that question. At the beginning, you want to try and steer away from trying to talk about solutions instead of what is being asked. So if you keep it more high level of what are we actually trying to accomplish, you fall into less pit holes of trying to solve the problem during a overall planning meeting. That's where I see a lot of the time slipping going to.
Any other questions?
I was just curious how you talk to new clients about this. I imagine most people reach out to the company and they're like, I want a piece of software built, and let's come up with a price and get the ball rolling. And then how do you come back to them and say, why don't we spend 4 days an additional cost to do this?
It's actually been a heck of a challenge, I think, to get part of it is trying to educate people super early about how we do it and why we do it. And there's probably a place where we almost destroyed the company like 3 years ago, where we were super like, oh, well, we just can't even give customers a price until they go through the workshop, because truly we can't actually give customers a price until they go through the workshop. But we're getting more savvy. What?
Let's be honest, we can't give customers an actual price till the project's complete.
That is true, but that's not what and we all know that, but nobody wants to hear.
Nobody
that.
wants to hear
that would be problematic. Let's not go for that. What we can do though is tell them up front, we can give you an idea of cost because we've built similar things for lots and lots of people. And we can say, hey, if you got kind of this is what you've brought to us as your requirements, this bullet list. We're pretty darn good at saying that's probably between a $200,000 and $350,000 project. Let's go through assuming you have the budget for that, which if you got 50K, we're not the agency for you anyway. Assuming that's within your budget range, now let's come and refine what feature set you want for your budget versus us giving you a budget for your feature set. And we just try and it's still a challenge. I don't want to say it's not, but we try and pitch it by bringing in people like our architects that give us a certain amount of clout, and we just try and showcase the fact that it makes us very outcome driven. Yeah, but it also means we almost never can answer RFPs, because how do you answer an RFP when they're very cost driven? It's difficult because we're not willing to put a hard stake in the ground on cost until we go through the workshop.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? All right, I must have done a fantastic job.
Obviously.
This video will be available for everyone. I just saw a chat that apparently there was more than one invite. I'm sorry if you were in the wrong place. I did record the whole thing, so we will. I'll work with Drew to get it up on YouTube or someplace easy for people to go and look at it later if you want to go back and review it. And then if you would like to volunteer to be trained or go through a workshop, please let your manager know, and they'll make sure that I know. And from an allocation point, the more people in the organization who have this skill set and who have this mindset, and even if we don't ever tap you to regularly, run or participate in them, you'll like it, even though it's harsh and a lot of work. It is a lot of fun, and I think it's really great to have those skill sets. So please let us know if you'd like to participate. We make room for people all the time to go through the training. Any other questions?
Thanks, Cameo.
Thank you very much.
So it's 12:45. I want to just open this up to, if you want to leave. If you want to introduce yourself because you've never met anyone before and you want to just, it's officially a free for all. I'm going to go find some food because I have a client meeting in another 14 minutes.
Word.
Perfect.
Thanks for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So now that she's gone, how do you guys really feel?
I was right here, Charlie.
I know, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That was cool. I'm excited to see one in action.
Yeah, and we should get you an opportunity to go through one as soon as possible. It's speaking from my perspective, and probably all of this has already been said, but it is a real game changer in what we can provide to our clients. It really helps sell. It really helps sell SolutionStream, and it helps us position ourselves as experts, and gives us an opportunity to position ourselves as experts and for the clients to see the expertise that we can bring to the table very early. And that, one of the amazing benefits of that is when we're at the beginning of a project, we have a relationship with our clients that is fantastic. Whereas before we started doing this, our relationships started bad and we were hoping to make them good, as opposed to now they start amazing and we try to keep them that way, it's a lot easier to maintain client relationship than build it. You know what I mean? I don't know if you feel the same, Josh. I'm going to lean on you here a lot because
I think that's a great point. It does make like the most loving relationships mostly.
Yeah. Even with clients that don't ultimately end up going with us, we usually get great reviews on LinkedIn or Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and we always do testimonials with them. So we've had a couple clients who've come in and they've raged about it. They don't love it when we present the budget to them because sometimes it's way more than they were prepared for, but they understand a lot better than they would have otherwise.
right.
So in other words, next time I have a project at home, I should do the same thing with my wife so that we have a loving relationship going into it.
You got it.
Right? Good skills.
But you say that jokingly, but my wife has several times because I've explained the process and the benefits, and several times after we're about 2 weeks into the process, there's been times where she said, you know what, it looks like we should have had a solution map. So
That's awesome.
I just don't dare time box my wife. That's
yeah, very good point. Very good point.
Well, and
I really love this process. It's very familiar. I've been with organizations that were very mature in the agile methodologies, and so this is all very familiar to me. I've also been with organizations that really, this is kind of the basic what must be done in reality. So it's very solid, and I definitely would be interested in working through one, participating. But it's good stuff. I like it formalized like this.
so I've been able to jump in on a couple of solution maps as we've gone through and developed them. And one of the items is some of the projects you don't always know what the need is for the client right off the bat, and you end up wearing more than one hat. These skills are very transferable. You're able to use them on multiple projects as you move forward. So it is just in general a useful skill set to have.
Awesome. Does anybody have any confusion about who SolutionStream is? At the end of the day, I don't know how many of you know me or have been introduced to me. I'm just going to take a couple minutes because I see a lot of names on here I don't recognize. I'm the Director of Technology and Architecture at SolutionStream, which I don't know what that means at the end of the day. It seems like I do a lot of work. But that's my role. And some of you, unfortunately, it gets to the point where I felt like at one point I knew everybody at SolutionStream, and now I feel like I struggle to have the opportunity to know people. So I just wanted to kind of share that. I've shared my bio on the Meet the Team channel. I would suggest everybody become a a member of the Meet the Team channel as well, because it offers us a huge benefit as far as getting to know one another. So that's me. There's so many of you, even people that have been here a long time, like Shay, that I haven't had the opportunity to interact with. So
Yeah, that's why I turned on my video, just so people could actually see me. I have only met a handful of people. So I know Casey really well, Nikki really well, Drew pretty well. I've met Lami a couple times in the office, Chad, but everybody else I haven't had the pleasure meeting face to face. A couple of my new hires I've met down there to get them all their stuff. So I've met them, but yeah, this is just a quick hi. Nice to meet you all virtually.
Hi, Shay.
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. Well, awesome. Well, I also have a client meeting to join in 8 minutes and a small amount of preparation to do. So I'm going to leave as well, but feel free to continue to hang out here and talk. So goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Charlie.
Bye. Bye.
I'm excited for the next presentations in the series.
Yeah, it'll be good. See you guys.
Thanks everybody for joining.
See you guys later.